Esther. Sister Esther, I think it's over to you.
Yes, okay. Greetings, everyone. I'm just going to, I don't know why we're got in the middle of the presentation here. Just bear with me 1 second. Hope everyone's doing okay. All right, there you go. So thank you to all of you at ACC for the invitation for me to join you here for this 7th wrap. I'm speaking on the topic which I've changed slightly to make it more cohesive with the discussion around Zenzele Village, building our power to secure Zenzele Village, utilizing group rights for assertion of non-territorial autonomy.
If we could all mute, please, while this presentation is happening. Thanks.
Okay, I hope to speak to you for about 30 minutes, if that's still okay. And perhaps I can have a time check at 5.
Yeah, that's fine.
That would be good. Okay, thank you. So just a opening reflection. What if we could govern our own education, health, and economy as African people right here in the UK? What if? That's a question that I'll be hoping to respond to during the presentation. So an overview, the presentation is really in 3 parts. The first part looking at the power shift from asking permission to asserting our rights, looking at group rights and what they mean and how we implement them. The second part is around the strategic framework, how we use group rights to claim what's ours. And the third part is looking at building our power. How do we engage in confronting resistance with confidence and concrete steps to secure the realization of Zenzele Village? So thinking about the strategic framework, the framework around group rights is really about asserting our power, not asking for permission.
Sis, could you
So
move
it's a
your
shift.
bar down to the bottom of the screen because it's blocking out some of the text? If you can move it to the bottom, that might help.
Hold on.
I don't know why Zoom hasn't worked out that this is a problem for all of us.
Something is blocking. Oh, there, that's gone.
Okay, is that better? Is that
Yeah,
better?
yes.
All right.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay. So it's a shift from asking for inclusion to building our independent capacity. So the current approach, where we're organising, we're constantly seeking or requesting resources from the city council or from funders or from institutions, seeking permission, seeking, partnerships for people to support our ideas and most importantly, fund them. And so this approach where we're utilizing or exercising our group rights would be about asserting our legal rights, building collective power, and securing the development of autonomous, meaning African heritage community controlled institutions. And why does this matter? Simply because we know that the way that we're currently operating, and that doesn't necessarily mean everyone on this Zoom call, but I talk about we in the collective sense, permission from whoever it's being granted can easily be withdrawn. And we're seeing a rollback on so many gains and rights that we already have. There's a rollback that we've seen certainly within the last 2 to 3 years. Also, power once built becomes self-sustaining. It cannot really be taken away. When we assert a rights framework, they exist whether they're recognized or not, locally or by those around us. And collective action creates the facts, the evidence base that we need on the ground. So what would change in how we organize if we started from the position of we have the power instead of we need your support too? Just something to think about or hold in your mind. So, why do groups matter for us as people of African heritage and ancestry, however we self-define, utilizing that as a broad kind of all-encompassing terminology? Because of the fact that we are survivors of the legacy of slavery, colonialism, and systematic discrimination. And, we in the Stop the Ma'angamisi campaign would refer to the Ma'angamisi as the African Holocaust, as the song by Akala goes, because we paid a hell of a cost. Okay, there are over 200 million people of African heritage worldwide. And again, this is all down to defining, but that's just a rough estimate. We need to think about group rights because of persistent inequalities in every area of people activity, but particularly education, health, employment, and our access or lack of access to justice. The framework of individual human rights or even civil rights alone is insufficient to address the enduring, multifaceted, intergenerational, and structural discrimination that we face as a people. And it's ultimately necessary for collective approaches to remedy the continuing or contemporary impacts of historical injustice that we experience. So, what are group rights for people of African heritage? Group rights for people of African heritage are collective entitlements held by African heritage communities as a distinct people based on legal foundations, international recognition, recognizing us as a people under United Nations frameworks, such as the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, the International Decade for People of African Descent, and the Draft Declaration for People of African Descent. Also, in terms of exercising our rights to self-determination, these are considered to be collective rights in international law, and they are really only properly accessed and deployed by peoples. And so if we're not seeing ourselves as a people, we won't really know how to exercise our rights to self-determination, what might be called national self-determination, that is our rights as a nation who are dispersed, because we are in the diaspora. Our nation is global, but it's also transnational, it's intercultural, and it's so many other things. So self-determination rights under Article 1 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and also the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Also, under collective remedy principles, which is for historical and ongoing systematic harm or systemic harm. So some of the core elements of these group rights include cultural rights, such as collective control over education, healing practices, knowledge systems, languages and revitalization and renewing of languages, and also cultural development in a substantive way. That means according to African principles, values, and traditions. Economic rights, so African heritage community controlled economic development, cooperative wealth building, resource sovereignty, and collective reparations for collective harm that we have experienced throughout the three main phases of the Ma'angamisi. Political rights, so autonomous decision making through the utilization of, say, people's assemblies, meaningful participation in policies affecting African heritage communities, locally, nationally, and internationally, or we might say globally, and also assertion of non-territorial self-governance. Non-territorial meaning that we're not claiming part of the British Isles, to have an Africa town. So we're saying we're going to cede part of the sovereignty of those that proclaim to have the majority sovereignty in this country by just developing our own little country within the UK. That's not what we're trying to do here. But also the exercise of territorial rights. This is how group rights can be realized. Collective control over historically African spaces, so where we have lived for centuries, ancestral lands, but also some of those lands that we were trafficked to, and we have built community, such as in Abya, that is the Americas, in particular South Abya, which has the largest population of people of African heritage and ancestry outside of the continent of Africa. It's about having protection from displacement and our rights to land for the realization of our African heritage community development. Some of the key distinctions here are that group rights are about assertion of our rights as a group, as a people, which is about asserting a common identity. And we are suggesting that that identity should be an African identity, despite the fact that that African identity has many, many variations within it. So these are rights held by the group as a people, not just individual protection from discrimination. Group rights are proactive rather than reactive. So they are inherent entitlements to self-determination. They're not just remedies after harm occurs. Okay, so we have a right to enforce our group rights, our right to be a people, because that's also about preventing our own annihilation in very real material terms, or even culturally, which is very much taking place. It's about autonomous versus integrative. So rights to self-governance and parallel institutions, the development of parallel institutions, because we cannot rely on the so-called white stream institutions in a society where we are dominated by a group that exercises or holds more power than us. It's also about not just having inclusion in systems that were never developed with us in mind or for us, and therefore they cannot really meet our needs. And some of the statistics around inequality, in particular racial inequality, show that it could take, a couple of 100 years before we receive. If we were to just keep going on the way we're going, milling on, it could take, a couple of 100 years for us to achieve full equity. And obviously we haven't got that kind of time. Okay. And with group rights, they are about asserting our right to enforce legal obligations based on historical and continuing harms and not voluntary assistance, whether it's, a civil rights framework that only the rights that the state recognizes of us, can we really tap into. And that is certainly the case now, because the British state does not recognize us as a people. We are treated as minorities, and we are not even afforded the status of minorities in international law, because there's such a thing called minority rights, where, for instance, we would be able to have our own schools, certainly teach our own, languages, or a choice of African languages. We would have the right to continue the preservation and development and passing on of our culture, and having the requisite institutions And these are not just cultural institutions. This is about how we do healthcare, how we do economics or group economics, how we promote education to recognize the whole self and the fact that we are societies of the living and the ancestors. So literally, it's not just about me, myself, and I. Okay. So some of the additional rights that group rights include, the key thing is that we are recognized as collective subjects, okay? Anti-discrimination protection, but moving beyond the realm of looking at individual cases of, racism in the workplace or anywhere else in public services. Cultural rights, so preservation and promotion of African cultural heritage and our spiritual or religious practices, which is, a sort of key area for our people. Educational rights, culturally relevant, quality education, reflecting African identities. Health rights, equitable access, addressing historical trauma and systemic health disparities. Economic rights, so equal opportunities in employment and development of sustainable livelihoods. Justice rights, so fair treatment and obviously rights to justice and protection from racial profiling, and also traditional knowledge rights, so control over our genetic resources, our inventions, our technologies, our medical practices, our traditional practices, and so forth. So group rights then, or certainly knowing about them and seeking to enforce them, are power tools that we already have. We have them. Nobody grants them to us. We recognize them for ourselves. But few people tell us about group rights, and few Black organizations or even anti-racist organizations or cultural organizations actually use this framework of group rights. So we have knowledge deficits amongst so-called experts and organizations that are really set up to work with our communities, serve our communities, and certainly meet our communities' needs. So the hidden truth is that we are already recognized as a people with collective rights in international law. And I would say from the year 2001, when there was the third World Conference Against Racism that took place in Durban, South Africa, there's been a growing recognition that we are a people. So the Durban Declaration and Programme of Action was one of the first UN documents that recognized the rights of Africans and people of African descent. That was the terminology. I would have used different terminology, but that was the terminology that many of our people who were engaged in a lot of campaigning and advocacy at the international arena, that was the terminology they went with. So Africans speak to those directly coming out of the continent of Africa, and people of African descent, naturally those that come from those people. So there's been some key mechanisms that have been developing where our group rights have been taking more, they've become more crystallized, let me say. So more recently, the UN Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, which is a formal UN body specifically for people of African descent as a collective group, not just individuals experiencing discrimination. We've had the International Decades for people of African descent. First one from 2015 to 2024. We're now in the second or renewed decade going to 2034. So the UN doesn't create decades for random groups. This recognizes us as having distinct collective identity and needs. And it's not like the UN just got up and did this. This was African people and allies around the world who kept on asserting this is who we are, and the current rights framework does not meet our needs. Okay, so part of how you assert these rights is to, one, recognize you have them, two, it's you proclaim them and you act as if they are real and that you should be having them. Okay. And then out of that comes increasing recognition from others. The draft UN Declaration on Human Rights of African people of African descent. So this declaration has not yet been ratified, but there's, been an ongoing process for a few years. And the UN Permanent Forum of People of African Descent is also championing the draft UN Declaration on the rights of people of African descent. So this is huge. These are huge milestones. As much as we can condemn the UN or even the way in which things that are down in documents don't get implemented, we have to recognize, I think, the giant leaps. Because to have a UN declaration on the rights of people of African descent is quite significant. It's really what we make of that and how we interpret that, and also what opportunities we're able to avail ourselves of. And
You
then
have
there's
10 minutes, my sis. 10
how
minutes.
much?
10.
Okay, there's also the Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, which has been around since 2002. I've got to move swiftly on. So why does this recognition matter for Zenzele Village? Because of the legal foundation, these UN mechanisms establish that people of African descent globally constitute a people. This means that we have a right to self-determination, which is about making our own decisions, about our political, economic, and cultural development. We have the right to build our own institutions, like the Zenzele Intergenerational Land Initiative. We have the right to collective decision making, like, for instance, some of the mechanisms that the Stop the Mangamizi campaign has been promoting, such as this is one. This is like a foundation level, the reparations RAPs, the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion groundings, and also Pan-African People's Assemblies. And states, and that includes the British state, have obligations to respect and support these rights. So our legal arsenal, I've already mentioned the rights to self-determination and the bodies that is, found in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Most of our people probably have never read them. I suggest you Google them and read them for yourselves. The right to cultural development. There's also the UNESCO Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity, the right to economic self-determination. So in both of the conventions, it recognizes all peoples may freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources. What does that mean for a people like us, whose resources are continually being looted from us, let alone what happened to our ancestors? And key one is the right to participation. So the UN Declaration on the Right to Development, and there's also rights of indigenous people around rights to informed consent and so forth. So Zenzele Village, a gap-inspired ACC vision of local autonomous power building. So Zenzele, meaning do it for yourself or do for self. The aspiration of that is that the process of effecting and securing it would be a case study of self-determination and how we exercise it in action. It's not just a community project, it's an exercise of asserting African heritage community sovereignty, given the fact that we are a dispersed people and we are a diaspora. Okay, so it's not just going to be a local Bristol thing for this to work. Zenzele Village is a power base for decision making, collective decision making. So we will determine the programs, the priorities, and the governance models, economic power, the cooperative economic models that are being explored, resource control, and that includes restitution of resources that institutions in Bristol and across the UK and in truth across the world are holding on to, that we need access to for our own development. And of course, wealth building, cultural values, so cultural power, the assertion of our values, our education, our knowledge systems, our healing practices, and a key one is political power, autonomous institutions that we can negotiate from as equals. So using group rights to claim what's ours, So I've said a lot about rights already, so I'll skip that. And exercising group rights is about building collective power through effecting, securing, and taking reparations. And so Zenzele Village is a vision, an aspirational vision for how we can effect community self-repairs in Bristol. But the Bristol, let me say, pilot of this will need to draw on support, just as happened with the Bristol Atonement and Reparations motion, not just from people in Bristol, but from African heritage communities across the UK and in truth across the world. Okay. We're utilising an unjust enrichment strategy. So those who have benefited from our exploitation owe us and are required to restitute the resources that belong to us. And of course, there's lots of research being done by lots of different institutions and community-based organisations to do some mapping around where those resources are, who holds them, and what can be done. But rather than us going as individuals making various demands, how powerful would it be if we were to go and organise ourselves as a collective, with a collective, or certainly harmonising our collective voices? And I've already spoken about moving beyond the kind of individual harms framework to looking at collective harms. So the three levels, these are the decision-making structures. So the reparations, reasoning and planning sessions like this one, Pan-African Reparations Rebellion Groundings, and then Pan-African People's Assemblies, which are about, trying to build consensus-based decision-making structures, seeking a mandate from our people. This is going to be really key for the success of Zenzele Village. How do ACC seek a mandate, an effective mandate from African heritage communities, both within and outside Bristol, and of course, democratic legitimacy. And so assemblies really help with that, giving people information, people having access to help shape and inform the development of some of the plans for Zenzele Village.
5
Now,
minutes.
thank you. In the last 5 minutes, I just want to touch on very briefly. I mean, I'm just doing a whistle-stop tour here through a lot of huge concepts that we need to think about and certainly reason about in a lot more detail. But the framework within which Zenzele Village fits in terms of exercising group rights is something that the Global African People's Parliament and the Stop the Manganese campaign and others have been championing, which is called non-territorial autonomy. So it basically means, as I said earlier, we're not saying give us part of the British Isles, we want to set up our own state. We're saying we need institutions because the nature of the harms against our people, the Manganese and its continuum, we can't wait, several hundred years for equity. We need to develop the institutions now. It's kind of like what the Black Panther Party did, with their survival pending revolution. Well, for us, it's really survival pending reparations programs and initiatives. And in order to do that, we need to be organizing as a collective, certainly in name, identifying as an African heritage community or as African people, which was why the Be African census campaign that was initiated by Sister Xosei, was so important. And it's also about then forming the mechanisms for the institutions. And so in this context, we're talking about Zenzele Village, but Zenzele Village will have to have its own kind of governance structure that is informed by the best practices around, community governance and so forth, and ensuring that we have those mechanisms like the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion Groundings and the People's Assemblies, Pan-African People's Assemblies, to be constantly reasoning with our people, talking with our people, hearing from our people, and ensuring what we're doing meets their needs. And so non-territorial autonomy is about exercising power, but without separation. It's going from being governed to govern ourselves, from being service users to service controllers or developers, from ethnic minorities seeking inclusion to African heritage people exercising our sovereignty. Um, and there's more to be said about that, about power without separation, because in the context of the British Isles, some of the objections that will come from the broader society, including some of our own people, is, oh, this is like black separatism. How's that going to work? It's not going to, that can't work in Britain. So you have to already anticipate what the objections will be, including from, ordinary members of our community, even some of our own family members, and find ways to counter that with the narrative that is promoted around Zenzele Village. Okay. And so there's, different aspects here in terms of the plans for Zenzele Village, which I'm sure ACC can say more about, but just from what I've already seen online, the different aspects, the planned governance power, the planned economics power, the planned cultural power, food power in terms of, crops, access to land, farm training, food sovereignty, energy power. So some of the technology, solar, wind power, reducing energy dependency and building sustainable practices, and of course, knowledge power. But that requires a lot more detail and depth from ACC to give that amplification. And so these are some of the, I wanted to sort of probably end then on some of the resistance that we'll face and our own responses. So this is separatism. No, we say this is about self-determination, a recognized human and people's right. We're building autonomous capacity, not separation. They'll say the council should control community resources. No, we have the legal right to exercise self-governance as peoples. International law backs our right to autonomy. And we're just saying we want non-territorial autonomy, which is the right to develop institutions that meet our people's needs. And there is even this recognition of special measures, because literally we're in a crisis state as a people. There is a need for special measures. They'll say this is too ambitious, and that's already been said. No, our ancestors survived the Middle Passage and the Maangamizi, which continues. We can certainly build our own institutions. We have it within us. They'll say this isn't how things are done in Britain. Our response, we're not seeking permission to exercise internationally recognised rights. We're asserting what's already ours. Obviously, part of the Zenzele Village programme would be about having ambassadors, with a full program, advocates program, which goes into this in a lot more depth. Okay. So finally, the next steps, building our power, concrete next steps. First of all, it's about asserting our rights. Today is part of that process of asserting our rights. And then going on to having the people's assemblies to make collective decision making, to have collective decision making with binding authority amongst those who identify as being part of our group. Okay. It's about demanding reparations from those who benefited from our exploitation. And certainly a first step in that is restitution of our resources, documenting our own autonomous decision making and our own research that we're doing in our families, what we're finding out about the role that we've played, the different institutions that have harmed us and what their obligations are. The second phase is then about securing those resources. Presenting our demands, which are backed by legal frameworks, organising collectively with a constituency, which is about our power building so that we can negotiate and assert our rights from a position of strength, not supplication, building alliances with other movements and other peoples and groups who are gaining recognition of their own, national struggles. So, for instance, we're hearing a lot about Palestine and the right to a Palestinian state. That is an emerging, growing consciousness amongst the wider society. We need to continue to do our research, and the phase 3, which is about establishing the village, which is where we ensure that we have the appropriate infrastructure under our people's control, with participation from African heritage communities, in an organised way, And those that are not directly involved may want to support in other ways through their skills, through resources, and many other different ways. So the question is, what will you contribute to building our collective power in each of these phases? And I will stop here. These were just some questions that I was leaving. What excites you most about the thought of Zenzele Village? But also, what concerns or fears do you have? And how can your skills contribute to this vision, or the realization of this vision, I should say? And what would success look like for you in 3 years, in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Thank you.
Yep, you can unmute and hail our sister.
Give thanks, give thanks.
Give
Guide.
thanks, man. Mhm.
Hello,
Yes,
Sister Esther.
give
Give
thanks,
Sister
Yes, give thanks. Yes, sis. Now, we come to the part where we really need to reflect on what's been said and reflect and give recognition, I guess, to what it is we are taking on. And as Sis said, your place in that potentially. So I just want to open up the floor, the room to everyone. And we will end with looking at next steps and how we perceive that we might take this forward, because you have to walk before you can run, and before you even walk, you crawl. And there are certain other steps, even before you start crawling, that you have to do. So let me just, does everyone know how to show their hand using the react button on the Zoom? There's a raise hand facility there. Yeah, if you click on the react button, there's a raise hand facility there. Mine is brown. I don't know. Yours might look like Homer Simpson. I don't know. So, Mzee Bekele, I think you just raised your hand. Did you have something to contribute? If so, please unmute yourself.
No, I was just practicing.
Oh, okay. Yes. So the same way you raise your hand, you lower your hand using the same thing, or you can just do so. So Mzee Cliff, I think you're speaking. Oh, you're not. Okay. Does anyone want to reflect, or are we feeling a little bit overwhelmed and stunned? Let's talk. We're amongst each other. How are you feeling right now?
Sis, it seems as everybody is stuck. You hear me?
Yeah, I have to hear you.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. This it's the idea of knowing you're inside your rights. You're not taking or asking or begging or anything. Like you're inside your rights, culturally, economically, politically, and whatever we do moving forward. It's a simple concept, but when you take action, knowing that you're right in law, and you're right, you're inside, you're human, you're right in the world, you're inside that right. It's a different behavior. It creates a different person, I think. That means your reliance on the things around you. It doesn't matter what happened to you. And it doesn't matter what happened to you. And you're looking to move forward. with your rights, because that's what you have. You have it. You have to live with it. So in other words, we are behaving opposite to that at the moment. We are behaving opposite to that at the moment. I don't know if anybody can hear me, because everybody looks stuck to me.
Thank you, Brother Noel. That's
Yeah,
a good segue. I think
I mean, it
Mzee
reminds
Cliff
me of
has
a
a
quote.
point. Should we take Mzee Cliff first and then come back to you, Sister Esther?
Sure, no problem.
Okay,
Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose for me, my biggest challenge and my fear really is this idea of group right, because we need to first and foremost see ourselves as a group of African people, and that to me is one of our challenge, for us to see ourselves as a group, and yeah, that's a starting point for me. And I never realized that we had these rights, to be fair. But now that I've heard them explain, my thing is, do we see ourselves as a group that would actually come together and to utilize our power to gain our rights, as Brother Noel just said? That's where I'm at the moment.
Thank you. Sister Esther.
No, please let me hear from others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else who was wanting to say something?
Yeah.
Oh, Mzee Bernstein. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say that it seems like a mammoth task, but I can see the end product, if you like. And my concern, small concern, I would say, would be just coming to terms with the fact that we're not going to be able to carry everybody along with this. And so we have to make sure that we put it into a language that people can easily understand. But then it's still going to be a question of, well, those who are willing to go on the journey will go, and those that are not will be left to do what they want to do. Yeah, and that's me.
Okay, and I would add to that there is an inherent risk in those who do not wish to be part of that going forward, becoming part of what holds us back. So we have to risk assess our own community, not just the non-African perpetrators of the Maangamizi, because there are African ones too. So yeah, thank you for that, Mzee. Anyone else? Mzee Bekele, please unmute yourself.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment. I haven't listened to all the rights, all the rights that we have. And I'm guessing that it's only maybe the usual suspects, if I can use that language, who knows that we have these rights. And maybe one of the things that we ought to be aware of, and if I can quote a little bit of the Bible, the part with Moses and the promised land, where he says that I may not get there with you. I'm paraphrasing, but those of us who grew up with the Bible might recognize it. When he showed them the promised land and said, well, the Israelites the promised land, and said, well, there it is. I may not get there with you, but it is there for you. I am leading you up to a certain point, and then it's going to materialize at a later date. And I think that maybe sometimes we think that we here, like we're gonna live past a certain age, so we're just putting in place things that the next generation can pick up the baton, so to speak, and maybe pass it on to maybe the next generation. before they actually see the promised land. I think an awareness of that, because the older we are old people now, we may not see the materialization of this for a long, long time. And I think that's a key element of how we should have our mental thing organized, so that we don't get overwhelmed with thinking, well, when is this going to happen? It's not going to happen in our lifetime. But that shouldn't stop us from putting things in place, which I view this event as being one of those moments where we are putting things in place so that the next generation, which I believe is probably one of the more important things, is how we bring up the next generation to have the same mindset, the same motivation and perseverance to continue the journey.
Thank you. Give thanks, Zebekele. Sis Cleo, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think connected to what was just said is in order for future generations to, and for ourselves to grasp it, it feels like we do need to put some case studies in action. So even if it's starting small, whatever that might be, it might be quite big, but just so we can see how it could play out and just to kind of get the idea out there practically. So I'm thinking of practical ways that it could work. Good to hear about the UN developments. One thing that I am aware of, and people around me have been in dialogue with me about it here and there, nothing really formal, is also the idea of how do some of us as social housing or council housing tenants, how could that be a kind of case study in terms of whether it's improving the conditions we already have, or of course some people have had kind of quite traumatic experiences and knee-jerk reactions with the whole discount being capped and all of this stuff, making people rush and feel they need to buy their homes, etc. In Bristol right now, the Green Party is now saying as well, homes that they think will cost too much to improve will be sold off. And I'm seeing our communities, members of our community, being displaced out of our traditional, I would say, areas. So I just feel angry about it. And I wonder whether there's something connected to what's been discussed tonight that could feed into a kind of case study on that, if that makes any sense. I hope people understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll suspend response to that for now. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, didn't put my hand up, sorry. I was quite taken by what Zenzele Village said, because you see that when we have these meetings, we get many of the same faces, we don't get many others. And when I hear Sis Esther talk about us having people's assemblies when we need to, make democratic decisions and take large, volumes of our people along with us, I don't think we'll get large volumes. And when I look at what past leaders have said, some of our ancestors who led large groups, they've said if you get 10%, you can achieve a lot, with just 10% of conscious people leading things. So a bit like what Cleo's saying, a bit like what MC Berstian's saying, we may not be able to take a large volume with us, but we can achieve something with just a few, and perhaps doing a case study. And I think with gender, you mentioned something like that to me a while back, would be something that would give some of our young people who have heard us talking about these concepts, would give them a bit of hope, that it's not just talk, it's something that can actually happen. Yes, that's all I want to say.
Give thanks. And maybe at some point, if it becomes necessary, we will, I think Sister Esther has laid out the vision for Zenzele Village quite well in terms of its potential. But if we need to come back to that, there are ACC members that can also build on that. Sister Letitia, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think my thoughts are about how do we, just based on what everyone's saying, what are the things that we can do to engender buy-in to, because I think a lot of people have felt burned by a lot of the things that have happened in the past, and that has created kind of sense of, I want to say, hopelessness, or feeling they can predict the defeat before they've even tried. And so it's like, what are the things that we can do to give people hope? And I think that this is kind of where Cleo talking about doing those small case studies that give that sense of success that people need to feel like they can get somewhere. And what are the things that we can do? Those are just like, that's the question that I'm thinking about. I'm always thinking about, like, how do we, not everybody who's not joining us is not interested, but they've already worked out that it's not going to work. And they're like, well, what's the point? So how do we change their minds about this? Yeah.
Yeah, you see, we established the Kundila Waze as one of those things that potentially flagship around this concept of self-governance, self-organizing, and self-determination. Because, what others, they don't see, they see other communities, but what they don't see is how they organize themselves and make decisions amongst themselves, how they carry their community structures into their everyday lives in terms of decision making and governance. And so that's why we had that outdooring 3 years ago. And it's not been easy, but the idea is, look, not everything has to go to court. Not everything has to go to social services. Not everything has to, you know what I mean? Some of these things that we need to do in our communities, we can develop our own structures. So that's like one thing. The success of it to date, we can argue about that for a long time, but that is part of what we have done. And when we see other groups, well, not other groups, even some of our own people establishing defense forces and working in similar ways to the Panthers in terms of their social welfare as well as protection elements. So we're seeing these things, but we're not seeing them as contributions to a village. We just see them as something that's happening over there that we, are not part of. So there's a responsibility on us to really be visibilizing the efforts that we're making beyond these meetings, and to put whatever we are doing into a context. We could talk about case studies, but we can also start something quite soon, because one of the things that we talked about in terms of Zenzele Village was, let's use our existing assets that we have, buildings and stuff, for part of what we want to do and what we need to do. You don't have, because Zenzele Village is a multi-million-pound ambition, and I think people recognize that, but you count sand from where you stand. So you don't have to be thinking about, I haven't even got £1, much less multi-millions, and who's not going to give up from who's not going to restitute our resources, because we can always, as I think Sister Letitia said, we always kind of think about why not, rather than how, in terms of our mentality. And that's part of our condition. That's part of the psychology of the Ma'angamisi on us too. So if we commit to some of the things that Sister Makeda is going to be talking about in a little while, this is how we grow. We grow our engagement and our involvement in building Zenzele Village, how we grow the message because we've tried some other things that have been less successful, like a survey and a QR code, that type of thing. So people can actually just complete something in which, can turn into thousands of people by way of mandate without having to start some sort of petition or something. So there are different ways to even demonstrate your support, that we perhaps need more capacity to get out there beyond these reparations wraps and other things that we have done. Because, Afrikan ConneXions Consortium had about 4 or 5 events this year alone. And so there are things we can do, is whether people are seeing what we are doing and if they're being effective. So yeah. So today is another point from which we can pivot and do something. But if there's no other comments, which we can take a few, we perhaps need to hear from Sister Esther, because we need to hear from Sister Makeda in terms of next steps, because it's 22 to 9 now, and we're due to finish around 9. Okay, Sister Esther.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much else to say at this stage. It was really important for me to hear people's responses. And obviously there were varied reactions and kind of responses. And thank you to those of you who also shared some fears and concerns, because this isn't easy. And I also accept the point that not all of our people are going to want this. And we can't force anybody. But if we look at all of the best initiatives that today we would remember or acknowledge, especially when it comes to acknowledging our history and so forth, it was always those who had that courage to stand above the masses and the crowd, and who had a vision that they implemented. And that's what we're doing here. We also have to be mindful of the context within which we're operating. The UK, where kind of the appetite for some of these ideas is very slim, We have, a huge amount of people in, multi cultural relationships, multi-ethnic relationships, which may, in many cases, may impact people's levels of comfort around, that's why I think dealing with some of the objections and even this idea of separatism, which is a legitimate fear and concern, because people are used to being operating freely with others, whether it's friends and relationships and so forth. And we need to be mindful of, this is a different terrain, say to the US, or even South America, South Abiyala, where we are more numerically dominant. We are still literally less than 5% of the UK population. And then amongst that 5%, maybe we might be able to, I don't know, a conservative guess, 5-10% of that remainder. And then within that, it will be a smaller section of the so-called African or Black conscious people, so-called, that would probably gravitate towards this. So we have to be aware of the huge obstacles that we face. But that is why I also support the view that was mentioned. Let's look at some case studies. Let's look at some examples, whether they're here in the UK or outside of the UK, where our people have come together. They might not have called it Zenzele Village, but the idea of us being on land, the idea of us actually having degrees of autonomy, there are different examples of that. And let's look at some of those examples, but also look at what we think will work here. What can we take? What do we need to tweak? And what won't suit our purposes? And it is really trial and error, but we have to keep going. And then I keep thinking about the early African abolitionists here, in particular from the Sons of Africa, people like Otobo Kugwano, Aluda Equiano, who were part of schemes with the British state to quote unquote, repatriate our people to parts of Africa. They didn't work because it wasn't led by our people. You know, we're coming out of the context where we, you know, literally chattel slavery and colonization. So a weakened context. But if even back then we were able, and when I say we, the collective we, as African people who were abolitionists organizing in cross communities, you know, across communities in Britain, were able to influence, um, you know, ordinary working class people racialized as white and allies who were fellow abolitionists around the necessity for us to not only return home, but actually have access to all that we needed to thrive. So it's a different context because this isn't about sending people back to Africa, although it's connected to organic organizing Africa. This is about those of us that will be here and know that this is going to be probably our home for a long time for some of us and people who have built family and who have built community here. And it's also about the next generation. What are we leaving for them? Because unlike when I was growing up, where we had community centres, I know you've still got a couple in Bristol, but let's face it, the national pattern across the UK is we are losing so many of the institutions that we were developing in the 80s and the 90s. So young people today are quite rightfully asking, well, what did you do? Because even the little bit that we achieved, which was really a huge amount, they're not seeing evidence of. You know, it's like a disappearing world. And we have to recognize that what is happening to us is genocide, is ethnocide. And whilst it's important for us to show humanity and recognize when this is happening to other people, surely begin with ourselves first. But if we're not confident, if we're not knowledgeable enough to even assert our own voice, I can remember when I first started talking about genocide in the context of Anti-Slavery International, that was white-led, and I was constantly being put down and ridiculed. Oh, that's not genocide. Do you know what that's not really what's happened to you. So we're going to get that. But if we don't have that confidence in self, then we're not going to be able to deal with, you know, literally even our own internal oppressor, which is the voice within that is telling us, no, this is not possible. No, leave it for the next generation. It's not just about the next generation. It is what we have a duty to entrust to them, because things were entrusted to us. And whether we like it or not, on some of our watch, we've lost some of this stuff, because we haven't continued that vision of our forebears. We haven't been courageous for some of us. For some of us, we got complacent. Okay, so we owe it to the next generation. We owe it to our ancestors. We owe it to our forebears who actually sacrificed in order that we can have a little bit more ease in this society and anywhere else we choose to be. And I think that we need to recognize this is an intergenerational legacy. Even if we're blessed enough to cross over into the realm of the ancestors, we will still be working for our people. It's not something that we just hand on or give up. We just work differently, as some of us are literally carrying on that memory of what our ancestors created. So that's what I would say in terms of my comments back to our people. We have to be courageous, we have to be confident, but we also have to be continually studying, updating our knowledges and our skills base, our competencies, learning from our youngers as well as much as they can learn from us. And let us see, because our young people are inspired by some of these ideas. They just may implement it slightly differently. But let's look for that common ground, and let's work on the basis of trying to get as many people as possible to embrace a common ground from which we can springboard some of these more evolved ideas from.
Give thanks, give thanks. So if not now, When? If not us, then who? So I think it's a pertinent time for Sis Makeda to just run through how we can take this thing forward. And Sis, you're going to speak in a minute, so you can ask your question. And if ones have also got ideas, Cleo's made a suggestion around case studies. But we also know that people come along on something when they see it working and that they can benefit from it. So we all need to think about that as well. So, Sister Makeda, please unmute yourself. You're very quiet, so I don't know if you need to move closer or change some kind of setting. Did you want me to screen share or?
Please. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Okay, just bear with me 1 minute then.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. Okay. So we've been hearing from Sis Esther the foundations of how we can assert our group rights and the different ways we can use that to build Zenzele Village. We've also spoken about the fact that it's not necessarily going to be done in a day. We are going to have to put some foundations in and hand over to our young ones to take things forward. So next steps for us, we now need to start doing the work to make it a reality. There's all kinds of activities we can do, but it does start with research, mapping, and information gathering. Next slide, please. So why do we need to do research? Some of you who've come along before may have seen some of these activities mapped out before, but there's a number of different things we have to be sure of, and we have to make sure that we have the knowledge of in order for Zenzele to succeed. So let's start with the first one. How do we build an African reparatory justice case for Zenzele Village? What are the things that we know about now, and what are the things we should know about to build a case for Zenzele Village? What are the different economic models out there that align with our ethos? There are some good ones, US, in Africa itself. I've seen some really good ones, but what ones suit what we want to do in Bristol the best, and why? Where can we get land? Land that is available for multiple uses, growing food, building an educational resource. Where can we find that? How can we find it? What economic, social, and cultural village models that already exist that we can learn from? We have Corporation Jackson in the US. That could be something that we could learn from, but we need to map it and write it all down to say why, which parts we can take forward. How do we build sustainability so that we give respect to Mother Earth, which is very much part of our culture? And what international laws, policies, initiatives, or frameworks out there that we can leverage? These are the kinds of things that a Zenzele research group would be doing. Next slide, please. So, if you take all of those kind of issues and break them down, they fall into these 4 buckets, roughly. So if you use the topic of land acquisition, the second topic is cooperative economic model, and then reconstituted resources, data mining on African heritage community restituted resources, let's say. And now, these are the resources which were illegally obtained by those who enslaved our ancestors. How can we map them out and look at what we can assert our rights to obtain to bring forward the Zenzele Village concept? And then international frameworks, laws, and initiatives like what Sis Esther was talking about, making sure that we really understand those so that we can assert our right to create the village. So next slide, please. So with your move, what do you do next? And I want to be honest and say that I know some of you have signed up already, and we do have your names on the list for when we do have our first meetings for those who are interested. But those of you who haven't and you want to, get going, here's some actions here. Once you sign up, you will create a WhatsApp group for ease of communications. We will hold a meeting with all of you as a group for an induction about ACC, an induction about the village, and also our ways of operating. We will host meetings on each of those research areas that we looked at earlier to kickstart the topic with you. You will be able to go off on your own in the field and do your research and bring it back to us, bi-monthly check-ins, and we'll look at progress, we'll discuss it with you and make recommendations. And, you'll be making presentations to ACC and the wider, the leadership team and also the wider membership group so that you can get feedback to improve it. And all of this will be documented and kept in our storage system so that we can reference when we actually have those assets. You can say, right, this is why we did this. There's a history, people coming forward, young people coming forward to take this forward. We'll have it all documented and understand why we took certain decisions and how we came to those conclusions. So there's our email where you can email us to say that you're interested, and we will, come back to you to make some of this happen. If you've got any questions, let me know, or we can put them in the chat. That's me done, Sis.
Research can take many forms, and this is why these pictures are here. And how we gather information, how we do our mapping, is not necessarily just sitting at a desk. That might be some of it. Some of it might be out there. Some of it might be traveling to some place, meeting people, doing whatever. It's as creative as it needs to be. And it says Zenzele Village Research Group or groups because we're not sure if it's going to be one group in all those areas yet, or one group and they kind of split off. So we are making the road by walking with this, and we'll get it right. We'll make some mistakes and we'll correct ourselves and we'll move forward. Not true? So it remains for me to thank you. I'm going to stop screen sharing before I hand over to the Kundilawase for closing remarks. But just in terms of what you've heard about the Zenzele Village Research Group or groups, I don't know if there were any questions or any thoughts even. Brother Noel, are you talking? Because you're muted. Oh, okay. Sis Abeje, are you talking to us?
Yeah, let me just take that off.
Okay.
My thoughts around what Cleo said about case studies, because I know that there was a book written by, is it Kidi Awadu, about setting up Kuji Chagolia Village in Ghana. And I know that discussion, that reasoning is ongoing as of today, So again, how can we as a group link in to that, learn from it, and look as the way forward in terms of, I know it's in Ghana, but it's to do with us as a people with similar vision as to being, having our own health, education systems, economy, our own autonomy, etc. How can us as a people, how can we work together to look at, you know, similarities, learn from each other, and present that, you know, because I'm not sure how many people are aware of it. I'm not sure of past villages that has been set up. So it would be interesting to know if that is continuing, what we can learn from it, what worked, what was successful, and how we can, you know, move on.
Yeah. That is one example. You know, we had a meeting this year with Cooperation Jackson. We hosted an event. Some of you may not been there, but Cooperation Jackson is another model of self-determined organizing. And so there are others that exist as well as, you know, Kuchitagule Village and Olatunje and others. So part of the role of the research group is to map what already exists. Whoever's interested in that, map what exists and answers the very questions you're asking. What is it? Because this is the conversation we had with the founder of Cooperation Jackson. What worked? What didn't work? How long did this take to happen? You know, if you were doing it all over again, what would you do differently? These, you know, you find people and then you need to engage with them. So the questions are to be asked in terms of what we already know, and in doing what we already know, we find out more. Likewise, we know there are lots of land initiatives, even in Bristol, but most of them are 99% European, white British kind of organized. How did they get those pieces of land? What are they doing on those pieces of land? What are the status of those organizations managing those lands? Some are built environment land, some are agri land. We know these things are happening, but we need to bring it all together. And then look at it through our African reparatory lens, also having the corner of our eye, the very subject that we talked about tonight, to say, how can we leverage that to get what these people have? Because sometimes you can get stuff, but you don't want them on those terms, but you want them on our terms. So this is why all those different elements that Sis Makeda talked about are important. And it needn't be more than 2 or 3 people working on a particular area. To answer the questions you, Sis Abeja, have just asked, to get answers and to come together every couple of months to kind of bring the intel into the space. You know, part of it might be in a study group format. We have this concept within the movement, within the campaign of Ma'atzoa Zaduras, which Sister Esther may correct me if I get it wrong, but the Ma'atzoa Zaduras are around action learning circles, okay? And they can be focused on particular things. And there's a breakdown, which I'm not able to explain to you, of why we call them Ma'atzoa Zaduras, because we're compounding different concepts together to come to that, because part of our repair is renaming and redefining our own conceptualizations of what it is we need to do. Sis, Esther, did you want to build on that at all?
No, it's fine. It's fine what
Okay.
you said. Yeah.
Okay, so without wanting to overload the thing, we leave Ma'atzoa Zaduras for now. But we talked about those for those who were part of the Pan-African Reparations Rebellion groundings, the first one that was held outside of London in Bristol on the 17th of May. We talked about Ma'atzoa Zaduras there. So it's not that we haven't been working, but we need not even so much a critical mass, we need more capacity for people to take on, as Sis Makeda said, these different areas, and just becoming very, very proficient in our knowledge of them and our knowledge of what's out there in those particular areas. That's what the Zenzele Village research groups are about, because we can't go forward without knowing certain things. Yeah. We're not at the stage now where we need an architect to design a building and all of this and la la. We're not there. We're at our embryonic stage right now. And as I said earlier, and I'll say it again, education is preparation for reparation. And that's where we're at now. So hopefully by tomorrow morning, I'll look in the emails and we will see that people are interested in being part of. And when you do email us, please do say which areas out of all of them that you may have been interested in. So that's African Heritage Community Restituted Resources, land acquisition, building your knowledge around tonight's presentation, group right, collective rights, and using that as leverage, and the economic systems and the models that already exist as the four research areas. So I'm 3 minutes over time. I need to say again, Oyiwadon, which is Ga for thank you. Okay, as well as all the other language I put in that slide that you now can't see. And leave the last words, I think, to the Kundila, unless there is something that anyone else would like to say before they close us out, please. Brother Madhu, please unmute.
Just very quickly, just to say that I've not heard anyone say let's stop and give up, which is encouraging. And also to say that there has to be a recognition that we who have been doing some things are also on a learning curve. So even knowing something about rights is something that we're learning. The issue around protecting current assets that we have keeps coming up. And I think that's one that needs some focus, because we do have things that we are still in sort of control of that we need to protect. So whilst we aspire to gain, we should also look at how we protect what we already have. And I think that keeps coming up every meeting we have. So that's a gentle reminder to people. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. Brother Noah?
Sometimes we can, like as we were saying, exercising, finding a small project to go through all the phases of a larger plan is also a way to document a small project. You can use that, to create the plans you need for the bigger one. So sometimes we probably need to take the steps far on a small project, take all the steps we need to make all the mistakes on something small so we can move.
Okay. Did you mute yourself or did you finish, Brother Nawale? I think you cut yourself off. Okay, sorry. Anyone else before the elders close us out? The Kundilawaze. Okay, well, I want to express deep thanks on behalf of all of us from Afrikan ConneXions Consortium and give thanks for Sister Esther's continued wisdom and knowledge, which we should not just rely on these events to know and hear this stuff, because that's part of why ZVRG is saying we need to invest in our own education and move forward and build on what we hear here. I will attempt to put this presentation on YouTube somewhere. Yeah. So thank you, Sister Esther. Thank you to all of you. And Mzee Cliff, Mzee Verstein, Mzee Bekele, Kundilawaze, over to you.
Yes. Give thanks, everyone. So I'm going to do the closing remarks, and I'll invite Mzee Bekele to do the closing libation. Yes, they say knowledge is power. So I want to start by giving thanks to Sister Esther for bringing power to us tonight. And I will say to you, Sister, long may the ancestors continue to bless you, to guide you, and to protect you so that you're able to fulfill your divine purpose. So thanks to you for your contribution tonight. In terms of closing remarks, I want to start from Brother Madhu, because Brother Madhu explained, gave us the background to the Global African People's Parliament and how ACC came about, and he shared with us some of ACC's purpose and some of the activities that they have been engaged in over the years. So that's ACC and background. In regards to Sister Esther presentation, all I can say, my head is hurting because there were so many things that was coming out. And the first thing I noted was the question was, what if we had power and control to determine our destiny? So I was thinking about that when she already moved on to a lot of other stuff, But then she talked about group rights, which is the essence of the main conversation tonight, and how that differ from individual or things like civil rights, because those types of rights she was suggesting are inadequate for what we need, in terms of our ambition and our aspiration. So I think she defined groups right as collective rights which belong to the group, and we can only access those rights as a group. And she said things like it's about asserting our power, not asking permission, So again, it's very much about self-determination. And she spoke about some of the key elements of group rights, which are things like cultural rights, economic rights, political rights, territorial rights. And on each of those elements, there were a small, if you like, explanation, which I haven't got, but I know that they're there. Okay. And other elements of key group rights included collective, cultural, and educational rights. Sis Esther spoke about group rights as a power tools. And she reminded us that we've already got these rights. And she mentioned the International Decade for the People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024. So yes, we've got these rights, but most of us don't know that we've got these rights. Then we talked a bit about Zenzele Village, and it's about rights to self-determination. And this includes cultural developments, participation. And she described Zenzele Village as an aspirational, concept that we're working towards. And it's about harmonizing our collective power, building collective decision making. These are some of the things that we need to be thinking about. She says also talk with us about non-territorial autonomy, which is about, rather than saying we want this piece of land, I would take over England, it's really about having a space where we can build our own institution, where we can have our own power base. But power without separation, I remember her saying. And an important part of the conversation was also recognizing how difficult this thing will be within the context of Britain, and for us to anticipate some of the objections that would be around, particularly from our own people. And she shared with us some tips about how we need to anticipate and prepare ourselves to respond to certain objections. She talked about building our power, which is collective decision making, that we need to demand reparation, that we should stop asking for permission, and that we should negotiate from a position of strength. Yes, I already mentioned being mindful of the context that we are operating in. Sis Clear mentioned case study, but it was further reaffirmed by Sister Esther of the importance of actually having examples to show our people that, you know, this thing has been done elsewhere before, or even in this country as well. Then we move on to Sis Makeda speaking about Zenzele Village. And what I can remember from that is that there is a series of questions that around the research group that we're going to be looking at. And one of the questions was, where will we get land from? We need to do lots of research. And she finished off by, you know, basically saying it's our move next. So if we want to get involved, these are the various steps that we can take, which include signing up and meetings, bi-monthly meetings, a series of things for us to do, you know, if we want to get involved. So I'm going to leave the final remarks at that point and invite Umze Bekele to the closing libation. Before Sister and I, do I need to give an opportunity to anyone to respond? I will just go straight into the libation.
No, we're closing out now.
Thank you very much. Umze Bekele?
Yeah, give thanks and praise. Blessings, everyone. Ones and ones. All due respect and reverence to the ones on a separate realm in the land of spirit. We obviously invited the ancestors to be present within this gathering, be it in different spaces, in different places. And we know from a fact that we've been sharing respectfully, and we've been showing grace and love to ones and ones, that the ancestors have been guiding our spirits and our thoughts and our actions, Ashe.
Ashe.
We ask for the continued warrior spirit to fight both mentally and physically, to continue the journey, because it is a journey. And as I said before in a previous remark, that many of us will not see the full extent of this, but still yet we have the vision to manifest what it may look like. Ashe.
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 So all that's left to say is to ask for the strength, the wisdom, and the perseverance to continue. Dedicate one's and oneself to the liberation, total liberation of Mama Africa, and that will be our goal. Ashe.
Ashe, Ashe.
Ashe.
Well, good peoples, until we meet again, would that be in this surrounding or maybe face to face for another edifying session. Ashe.
Ashe.
And before you depart, you perhaps need to know about the Pan-African People's Assembly on African reparations, which we forgot to properly announce. Now, this takes place in London on Saturday, the 27th of September. Sister Esther, can you give us a minute on that, please, to say what it will entail, start time, finish time, venue, etc.?
So it's going to be at the Africa Centre, which the nearest station is Southwark Tube Station. It will be from 11 till 4 p.m. and it's a Pan-African People's Assembly, which is really what we're trying to do, is call our people together so that we can talk about reparations and how people see reparations, because so many developments are happening about us but without us. You know, we have Caribbean states and we have African states declaring this and declaring that, flying all over the world, But a lot of this discourse is happening over the heads of people. The people are not engaged. And I think, to be quite frank, don't know how to be engaged. And so with the People's Assembly, it's really a kind of communiocratic, can we say, so-called democratic, but I prefer communiocratic gathering where we canvass the thoughts, the aspirations, the ideas, and what our people want to see, because no one is recognizing that we have a right to be heard, that we have a right to participate, and that we cannot just be, fitted in to even CARICOM or AU state frameworks, because they don't recognize us as diasporas. And so we have to speak for ourselves. And this becomes an important tool for building our power, but also for asserting our voices. It's not yet a collective voice, but we need to create the space where we can hear as many of our people as possible. And we see this as being an essential preparatory stage for one of the Stop the Manganese campaign goals, which is to secure an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. So it's about preparing our people for engaging in a meaningful way in actually decision making about reparations that no one else is doing. No one else is creating the space to hear from ordinary people.
Give thanks. And Brother Madhu, will ACC be organising transport to London? You're muted. Yes. Okay. So you have our email address. Make sure you email us either about the research groups or that you're interested in traveling to London on the 27th of September, or both, please. Yes. The email address is in the chat if you missed it. So I shall be closing down this chat. Once again, giving thanks to those who are here, those who are listening from the sidelines, those who could not be here, but have pledged their support. The ancestors have given me a revelation tonight, which I will share with ACC members in the first instance, not right now. But something was shared with me while Mzee Cliff was feeding back. So I will have that conversation and hopefully have a bigger conversation about that revelation that came to me. All right, another time. So thank you. We've gone 20 minutes over, but I hope you will agree this 20 minutes over well spent. Yes, it's great to see so many faces. Bring someone else with you next time. Yeah? Yeah. Give thanks. Have a great evening. Have a great evening.
Yes.
20 past 8 here, but I know it's 20 past 9 for you.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Yes.
Give thanks. Yeah. ACC members, please stay on.
Okay.
Thank you. Says you can stay. Now, what came to me, okay, is that Brother Mother's gone? Did I not? What's wrong with him? Anyway, all that came to me, right? Oh, no, all right? Everybody all right? You can unmute, you know?
Yeah,
Let me stop the recording, actually.